My fiancée put a snake in my bed because she thought I was cheating on her. Looking back, the change in Lily happened so gradually that I didn't notice at first. At the start of our relationship, everything felt easy, natural. We'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing, cracking jokes, sharing dreams, and laughing until our stomachs hurt. But over time, those lively conversations began to fade. At first, I chalked it up to life getting busy. We both had demanding jobs. Lily worked in finance, and I managed a growing team at a tech startup. Exhaustion was part of the deal, or so I thought. She stopped asking about my day, her once playful, "What's the office drama this time?" replaced by curt acknowledgments when I walked through the door. When I asked about hers, she'd give distracted, clipped responses, her attention fixed on her phone or a half-empty glass of wine. I told myself it was just a rough patch, something we'd work through when things settled down. But it didn't feel like just work stress. The first real red flag came out of nowhere. One evening, as I was putting my phone down after answering a text from my coworker Matt, she asked, "Who were you texting?" Her tone was casual, but there was something sharp underneath. "Matt," I said, caught off guard. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her reaction lingered in the back of my mind, but I let it go. A few nights later, she noticed the new shirt I'd bought for a client meeting. "Trying to impress someone?" she asked, her voice light and teasing, but her eyes studied me a little too closely. I laughed it off, brushing it away as a joke, but her tone stuck with me. It was the kind of question you ask when you're half expecting an answer you don't want to hear. Things escalated when I woke up in the middle of the night to the glow of my phone illuminating Lily's face. She was scrolling through my messages, her thumb moving quickly across the screen, her eyes darting back and forth like she was searching for something. "Lily," I said, groggily sitting up. She flinched but didn't stop. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "Just checking," she said flatly, not even looking at me. That word, checking, sent a chill through me. I stared at her, my heart pounding. "Checking for what?" She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I don't know," she said quietly, turning the phone off and placing it on the nightstand. She pulled the blanket over herself and rolled away without another word. That moment was a turning point, though I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't just about her going through my phone. It was what her actions represented. Lily didn't trust me, and for the first time, I began to wonder if she ever really had. Something was broken between us, something I hadn't even noticed until it was staring me in the face in the middle of the night. For the next few days, her behavior didn't let up. Every text notification, every late night at the office, every phone call was met with a subtle but unmistakable suspicion. I started to feel like I was living under a microscope, my every move analyzed and dissected. I didn't know how to confront her without making things worse, so I kept quiet, hoping she'd snap out of it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't something that would fix itself. The Lily I knew, the one who laughed at my terrible jokes, who trusted me implicitly, who made me feel like I could conquer the world, felt like a distant memory. In her place was someone guarded, mistrustful, and shadowed by fears I didn't understand. And the more I tried to reach her, the further away she seemed to drift. After that night with the phone, Lily's paranoia seemed to take on a life of its own. Every moment of my day was scrutinized. If I got home 5 minutes late, she'd ask why, her tone casual but laced with something sharper. If I worked late, she'd press me about who I was really with, her disbelief palpable no matter how straightforward my answers were. Even the mundane became sources of suspicion. One evening, I came back from the grocery store to find her waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed. "Why did it take you 30 minutes to buy milk?" she asked, holding up the receipt like it was evidence. I blinked, confused. "There was a line, Lily," I said, my voice edging on exasperation. "What do you think I was doing? Meeting someone in the dairy aisle." Instead of laughing it off, she frowned, her eyes narrowing as if trying to read between the lines. "You're acting defensive," she said. It wasn't just frustrating, it was exhausting. I tried to reassure her, but my words seemed to hit an invisible wall she'd built around herself. One night after dinner, she accused me of acting too happy when I talked about a project at work involving a female coworker. "You're always smiling when you mention her," she said, her voice icy. "Lily, she's just part of the team," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "I'm happy because the project is going well, not because of her." She folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. "You'd say that even if you were lying," she shot back. Her words hit me harder than I expected, not because I was guilty, but because it felt like no matter what I said, her mind was already made up. The tension in our house became unbearable. Every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. Every conversation a carefully laid trap waiting to spring. I started to dread coming home, knowing that no matter how hard I tried to keep things normal, I'd find myself facing another round of accusations or icy silences. It wasn't just her words that hurt. It was the looks, the body language, the way she seemed to flinch when I reached out to touch her shoulder. The warmth and trust that had once defined our relationship were gone, replaced by an icy wall I couldn't break through. One evening, I tried to confront her directly. "Lily," I said as she folded laundry, her movements stiff and deliberate. "Why do you think I'd cheat on you? What have I done to make you believe that?" She paused, her hands gripping the edge of a towel. "It's not what you've done," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "It's how you've been. Distant. Secretive." I frowned, confused. "Secretive? Lily, you went through my phone. You have access to everything. What secrets am I keeping?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the laundry like it held the answers she was searching for. "I don't know," she admitted after a long silence. "But something feels off." Her words made my chest tighten. I missed the Lily I'd fallen in love with. The woman who trusted me, who didn't overanalyze my every move, who didn't look at me like I was someone she couldn't recognize anymore. Now, it felt like I was living with a stranger, someone consumed by fear and suspicion. The worst part was that her paranoia began infecting every part of our lives. She stopped joining me when I met up with friends, convinced I was using the time as a cover for some imaginary affair. She started double-checking things I told her, like calling my office once to make sure I was actually there. Every accusation chipped away at the foundation of our marriage. The trust we'd built, the bond we'd shared, it all seemed to crumble under the weight of her doubts. I wanted to fix things, to find a way back to the relationship we'd had before. But I was beginning to realize that it wasn't just about reassuring her or proving my innocence. This wasn't just about me. It was about something deeper, something inside her that I couldn't fix on my own. And as much as I wanted to believe that this was just a rough patch, a temporary hurdle we'd overcome, a part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if this was who Lily had become? What if there was no way back? The breaking point came on a night I'll never forget. It had been an exhausting day at work, and I felt drained in every way possible. All I wanted was to collapse in a bed, close my eyes, and escape the tension that had taken over our home. When I finally slid under the covers, my body craved the comfort of sleep. But that comfort was shattered in an instant. Something cold and smooth brushed against my leg. For a split second, I thought it was Lily's foot, but then it moved, slithering. My heart stopped, a jolt of adrenaline coursing through me. My mind screamed no, but my body acted faster. I threw off the blanket and scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed in my panic. My shout echoed through the room as I stared in disbelief. A snake, a real, live snake, was writhing on my side of the bed. "Lily!" I yelled, my voice shaking with panic. "Lily, get in here!" She appeared in the doorway, her expression calm, almost detached. My pulse pounded in my ears as I pointed at the snake. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice cracking. She didn't flinch, crossing her arms as she leaned casually against the doorframe. "I'll put it there," she said flatly. Her words didn't register at first. I blinked, certain I'd misheard her. "You what?" "I put it there," she repeated, her tone matter of fact. "I thought maybe it would wake you up, make you see how serious I am." For a moment, all I could do was stare at her, trying to process the sheer insanity of what she was saying. "You thought putting a snake in our bed would wake me up? Are you insane?" My voice rose as fear turned to disbelief and then to anger. Her face hardened, and she took a step closer. "You think I don't notice how distant you've been?" she said, her voice cold and clipped. "How you're always smiling at your phone or staying late at work? I'm not stupid." I could barely believe what I was hearing. "Lily, I've told you 100 times. I'm not cheating on you. And this is your solution? To put a live snake in our bed?" She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "I needed to get your attention," she said simply, as if her actions were the most logical thing in the world. I stared at her, the fear from the snake fading as something colder settled over me. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. This was something darker, something more dangerous. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the Lily I knew, the Lily I'd fallen in love with, who used to trust me implicitly, who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and dream about our future together. She was someone else entirely, someone consumed by mistrust and fear, someone who had convinced herself that I was the enemy. The snake, now mostly still, became a grotesque symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us. It wasn't just about the snake. It was about what it represented. The mistrust, the paranoia, the breakdown of a relationship that once felt unshakable. "Lily," I said finally, my voice quieter now, but no less firm. "This has to stop. You're going too far." She didn't answer, her gaze shifting from me to the bed, where the snake continued to writhe. Her silence was deafening. I didn't know what was more terrifying, the snake itself, or the fact that she truly believed this was justified. That night, I slept on the couch, though I hardly slept at all. My mind replayed the moment over and over, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out where we'd gone so wrong. The woman I loved had put a snake in our bed to prove a point, and I didn't know if we could ever come back from that. That night, the snake was removed from our bedroom, but the damage it left behind felt impossible to clean up. I couldn't bring myself to go back to bed. The idea of lying in the same sheets where Lily had planted a live snake to make a point was too much. Instead, I stretched out on the couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. Part of me wanted to march back into the bedroom and scream at her, demand answers, and force her to see how reckless and absurd her actions were. But another part of me felt a hollow sadness, a deep ache for the marriage we once had, the Lily I used to know. How had things gone so wrong? The longer I thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a matter of trust. It was something bigger. Lily had allowed her paranoia to consume her to the point where she believed her actions were justified. And I, in turn, had retreated emotionally, trying to protect myself from the fallout instead of addressing the underlying issues. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped talking, stopped listening, and stopped trusting each other. The snake was just the most extreme symptom of something that had been festering for a long time. The next morning, I decided to confront her. I couldn't keep avoiding the conversation. We had to face what had happened, no matter how difficult it was. I found her in the kitchen, staring blankly into her coffee cup. She looked exhausted, the dark circles under her eyes mirroring my own. "Lily," I began, my voice tired but firm, "we need to talk about last night." She didn't respond right away, but I pressed on. "You can't keep doing this. You can't keep assuming the worst about me. You put a snake in our bed, for God's sake. Do you understand how insane that is?" She finally looked up at me, her expression a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "You think I wanted to do that?" she said, her voice trembling. "Do you think I enjoyed it?" I didn't know what else to do. Her words stopped me in my tracks. "What do you mean? Didn't know what else to do?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. She looked away, her fingers tightening around her coffee mug. "You've been lying to me, shutting me out, smiling at your phone, staying late at work, acting like I don't exist. I didn't know how to make you see how I felt." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been distant. I couldn't deny that. But not for the reason she thought. The truth was I didn't know how to handle her growing paranoia. Every accusation, every suspicious look, every hostile question had pushed me further away. And instead of addressing it, I'd pulled back, hoping the problem would resolve itself. Clearly, that had only made things worse. "I wasn't lying to you, Lily," I said, trying to keep my tone calm despite the frustration building in my chest. "I've never lied to you. But yes, I've been distant. I didn't know how to deal with this, with you thinking the worst of me all the time." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Do you know how hard it is to feel like you're not enough? To feel like someone is slipping away from you, and you don't know why?" I didn't know how to respond to that. On one hand, her words cut deep, revealing a level of pain I hadn't fully understood before. On the other hand, her response felt like a deflection, a way to justify something that was frankly unjustifiable. "Lily," I said finally, my voice soft but firm, "you can't deal with your fears by putting a snake in our bed. You can't handle mistrust by doing something so reckless and dangerous." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her coffee again, her knuckles white as she gripped the mug. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with unspoken words neither of us knew how to say. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for something, for an apology, an acknowledgement, a promise to change. But none of that came. Finally, I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. That day, I realized just how far apart we'd drifted. We were two people living in the same house, bound by a marriage that felt more like a battlefield than a partnership. And as much as I wanted to believe we could fix things, a growing part of me wondered if it was already too late. The days following the snake incident were suffocating. Lily and I moved through the house like strangers, barely speaking except when absolutely necessary. When we did talk, the tension was unbearable, every word laced with hostility or resentment. She remained defensive, unwilling to acknowledge that she'd crossed a line. Instead, she dug her heels in, justifying her actions at every opportunity. "If you weren't hiding something, you wouldn't care so much," she said one evening, her arms crossed as she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her glare sharp enough to cut through steel. Her words made my chest tighten with frustration. "Lily, listen to yourself," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You're accusing me of things I haven't done, and when I try to defend myself, you twist it into more evidence against me. How am I supposed to prove my innocence when you've already decided I'm guilty?" She pressed her lips into a thin line and looked away, her jaw set like a wall I couldn't break through. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with all the words we didn't know how to say to each other. I stared at her, hoping for some sign of understanding, but her face was closed off, her arms still folded tightly, as if to shield herself. It was clear we were both at a loss, her consumed by her insecurities, and me by my inability to bridge the ever-widening gap between us. The worst part was that I couldn't understand how we'd reached this point. I'd given her no reason to think I was being unfaithful. No hidden messages, no suspicious behavior, nothing. Yet no matter how much I tried to reassure her, she clung to her suspicions like a lifeline. It felt like she needed to believe I was cheating, as if the idea of betrayal had become more real to her than the reality of our life together. Every attempt I made to talk things through ended in circles. When I asked her why she thought I was lying, she'd say vague things like, "You've just been acting differently," or "I can feel it." If I pressed her for specifics, she'd accuse me of trying to confuse her or manipulate her. It was maddening. There was no evidence, no reasoning, no logic behind her accusations. Just a stubborn certainty that wouldn't budge no matter how much I tried to reach her. Her insecurities hung in the air between us, insurmountable and impenetrable. I found myself retreating even further, afraid that anything I said or did would only make things worse. But the more I pulled back, the more desperate she became. One night, as I sat on the couch trying to lose myself in a movie, she appeared in the doorway, her arms tightly crossed over her chest. "Why don't you love me anymore?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "Lily," I said finally, setting down the remote, "this isn't about love. I do love you, but I don't know how to make you believe that when you won't trust me." Her eyes welled up with tears, but instead of softening, her expression hardened. "You don't get it," she said, her voice breaking. "I feel like I'm losing you, and you won't even admit it." Her words hung in the air like a weight pressing down on my chest. I wanted to tell her she wasn't losing me, that she was pushing me away with her accusations and her refusal to listen. But looking at her in that moment, so hurt, so fragile, I couldn't bring myself to say it. Instead, I shook my head, stood up, and left the room, leaving her standing alone in the doorway. That moment felt like a breaking point. The chasm between us had grown so wide that I didn't know how we could ever bridge it. She was consumed by her paranoia, convinced I was hiding something, while I felt like I was shouting into a void, my words lost before they could reach her. I didn't know how much longer we could keep living like this, but I knew one thing for sure. If something didn't change soon, there wouldn't be anything left to save. A week after the snake incident, Lily and I found ourselves sitting in a therapist's office, the air between us thick with tension. I had insisted on therapy, desperate to make sense of what had happened and to find a way forward. Lily had reluctantly agreed, though not without skepticism. As we drove to the appointment, she muttered under her breath, "It's not going to change anything if you're not honest." Her words stung, but I pushed my frustration aside. This wasn't the time to argue. It was our chance to fix something that felt irreparably broken. The therapist, a calm and composed woman named Dr. Keller, welcomed us into a cozy room with soft lighting and overstuffed chairs. She began with the basics, asking us to share why we were there. After I explained the snake incident in the most diplomatic terms I could muster, Dr. Keller turned to Lily and asked the question I had been too afraid to pose directly. "Lily, why do you believe your husband has been unfaithful? What made you feel that way?" Lily hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Her eyes darted to me before settling on her wedding ring. "He's distant," she said finally, her voice quiet. "And he's always smiling at his phone. He never used to do that." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I frowned, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Then it clicked. "You mean when I was texting Matt about work?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, her tone defensive. I didn't know, she mumbled. Dr. Keller leaned forward, her expression kind but firm. Lily, why were you so quick to assume the worst? What about his behavior made you jump to that conclusion? Lily didn't answer immediately. The silence in the room was almost unbearable. Finally, she spoke, her voice small and hesitant. I don't know, she admitted. I didn't feel good enough. Like he'd get tired of me eventually. Her admission stunned me. All this time, I'd been fighting her accusations, trying to prove my innocence, when the real issue wasn't about me at all. It was about her insecurities, her fears, and her belief that I would betray her simply because she didn't feel worthy of trust. Dr. Keller nodded thoughtfully. That's a powerful feeling, Lily, she said. But can you see how those fears might be coloring your perception of what's happening? Have you ever talked to him about how you're feeling? Lily shook her head, her gaze fixed on her hands. No, she admitted. I didn't know how, and I didn't want to seem weak. Her words cut deep. I had always seen Lily as strong, confident, and self-assured. It never occurred to me that she might be struggling with doubts and insecurities she felt she couldn't share. Lily, I said softly, leaning toward her, you're not weak. If I'd known you were feeling this way, I would have done everything I could to reassure you. She finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You were pulling away, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know why. I thought you'd already made up your mind to leave. Her words cut like a knife. I had been pulling away, but not for the reason she thought. I had retreated because I didn't know how to handle her growing mistrust. Every accusation, every suspicious glance, every argument had made me feel like I was walking on eggshells, and I had distanced myself in an attempt to protect both of us from further conflict. But in doing so, I had unwittingly fed her fears, creating a vicious cycle neither of us knew how to escape. Dr. Keller broke the silence, her voice calm and measured. It sounds like both of you have been caught in a loop of misunderstanding. Lily, your fears have been driving your actions, and those actions have, in turn, pushed him away. And you, she said, turning to me, have been pulling back instead of addressing the issue head-on, which has only reinforced her fears. I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy blanket. She was right. We had both been contributing to this downward spiral, even if we hadn't meant to. As we left the session, Lily and I didn't say much, but something had shifted. The tension between us felt slightly less suffocating, replaced by a faint sense of possibility. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I felt like there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. After our first session with Dr. Keller, Lily and I sat in silence in the car outside the therapist's office, neither of us ready to go home. The conversation we'd just had lingered in the air between us, raw and heavy. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, but I didn't know where to start. The woman sitting beside me, looking so fragile and lost, felt like someone I didn't recognize, yet someone I'd been trying to reach for weeks. Finally, I spoke. Why didn't you tell me you felt this way? I asked, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. Why didn't you let me know you were struggling? Lily wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling as she answered. I didn't know how, she admitted, her gaze fixed on the dashboard. You've always been so sure of everything, so confident. I didn't want to seem weak or needy. Her words hit me harder than any of her accusations had. Not because they hurt, but because they revealed how blind I'd been to what was happening beneath the surface. I had always seen Lily as strong, independent, and self-assured. She was the one who kept us organized, who always seemed to know what to do when life threw us curveballs. It never occurred to me that beneath that exterior, she might feel insecure or afraid, that she might need reassurance she didn't know how to ask for. Lily, I said gently, reaching for her hand, I'm not going anywhere. You're enough. You've always been enough. She finally looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, her defenses dropped, and I saw the vulnerability she'd been trying so hard to hide. I didn't feel like it, she whispered. You've been so distant, and I thought you didn't want me anymore. Her confession broke something in me. I had been distant, there was no denying that. But it wasn't because I didn't want her. It was because I didn't know how to handle her growing mistrust, and instead of facing it, I had retreated, hoping it would go away on its own. I realized now how much that had hurt her, how it had reinforced the very fears she was struggling with. I didn't mean to pull away, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't know how to handle what was happening between us. Every time you questioned me, I felt like I was failing you, like nothing I did was enough. So I pulled back, and I'm sorry. I see now how much that hurt you." She nodded, her tears finally spilling over as she gripped my hand tightly. "I just wanted to feel like you still loved me," she said, her voice breaking. "Like I was still enough for you." "You are," I said firmly. "You always have been, and I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't. That's on me, and I'm going to do better. But we can't keep doing this to each other, Lily. We have to stop tearing each other apart." She nodded again, her grip on my hand tightening as though she were afraid to let go. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with. It wasn't a fix, but it was a start. We sat there for a while longer, the weight of the conversation settling over us like a blanket. Neither of us knew what the road ahead would look like, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like we were facing it together. When we finally drove home, the silence between us wasn't tense or uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with understanding and the faintest hint of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we might actually have a chance to make things right. Therapy became a lifeline for us, a space where we were forced to confront the issues we'd both ignored for far too long. Over the weeks, Lily began to open up in ways I hadn't seen before. During one session, she shared something that hit me like a gut punch. "My dad left," she said, her voice trembling as tears streamed down her face. "He was so steady, so dependable, and then he was just gone. I guess part of me always thought if someone like him could leave, anyone could." Hearing her say those words broke something in me. For so long, I'd been looking at her accusations as a reflection of me, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong or how I could fix it. But now I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about the pain she'd been carrying for years. The paranoia wasn't born from anything I'd done, but from wounds that had never fully healed, scars left by a betrayal she'd experienced long before we'd even met. As she spoke, I saw just how deeply that fear had shaped her. It wasn't just the accusations, the mistrust, or even the snake incident. It was the belief she'd carried for years that everyone, even those who seemed the most dependable, would eventually leave her behind. For my part, I had to confront the ways I'd contributed to the spiral. I'd spent so much energy defending myself against her accusations that I hadn't taken the time to understand what she was feeling. I'd pulled back emotionally and physically, hoping that giving her space would de-escalate the tension. But instead, I'd unknowingly fed into her fears, reinforcing the belief that I was pulling away because I didn't care. "I thought I was giving you space," I admitted during one session, my voice heavy with regret. "But I see now that it just made you feel more alone." Lily nodded, her gaze meeting mine for the first time in what felt like weeks. "It did," she said softly. "But I know now that wasn't your fault. I didn't know how to ask for what I needed." We began taking small steps to rebuild what had been broken. They weren't grand gestures or sweeping changes, but simple, deliberate efforts to reconnect. I made a conscious effort to be more present, to communicate openly instead of retreating into myself when things got difficult. If Lily asked where I was or who I was with, I didn't respond defensively. Instead, I answered calmly and honestly, making it clear I had nothing to hide. Lily, in turn, began working on addressing her insecurities directly. She started practicing what Dr. Keller called vulnerability with intention, learning to express her fears without letting them spiral into paranoia. "I feel scared when you work late without telling me," she said one night, her tone calm but honest. It was a stark contrast to the accusatory tone that had once defined our arguments, and I made a point to respond with the same honesty. "I understand," I told her, "and I'll make sure to let you know next time." Our evenings, which had once been fraught with tension, began to feel lighter. Instead of retreating to separate corners of the house, we started spending time together again, cooking dinner, watching shows, and even just sitting on the couch talking about our days. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when her fears crept back in, and moments when I felt frustrated by the slow pace of progress. But we were both trying, and for the first time in months, it felt like we were on the same team. Lily also began confronting the root of her fears. Through therapy, she explored the impact her parents' messy divorce had on her and unpacked the belief that she was destined to be abandoned by the people she loved. "It's not easy to let go of," she admitted one evening, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm trying. For us." Her willingness to face those fears inspired me to confront my own. I started reflecting on the ways I'd withdrawn when things got hard, recognizing how those habits had contributed to the distance between us. "I didn't realize how much I shut you out," I told her one night. "But I'm going to do better." Rebuilding trust wasn't a straight line. It was messy, filled with setbacks and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were truly trying. We weren't perfect, and we weren't pretending to be. But we were moving forward one step at a time, learning to navigate the challenges together instead of letting them pull us apart. Eventually, we decided to move to a new house. Our old home, once a place of warmth and love, had become a minefield of painful memories, of tense silences, heated arguments, and, of course, the snake incident. Staying there felt like trying to build something new on top of ruins. The idea of a fresh start, a space untouched by the chaos of the past, gave us both a sense of hope. The new house was smaller but cozier, with a backyard big enough for a garden and a neighborhood that felt inviting. It wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a chance to redefine our relationship. Packing up and leaving the old house felt like shedding a skin, a symbolic act that allowed us to leave behind the weight of everything we'd endured. When we stepped into our new home, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were stepping into something better. Our routines in the new house became a source of comfort and stability. We cooked dinner together most nights, something we hadn't done in months. Even simple meals became opportunities to reconnect, with Lily chopping vegetables while I stirred pots on the stove, the quiet hum of our teamwork filling the space. In the evenings, we went on walks around the neighborhood, talking about our days and rediscovering the ease that had once been so natural between us. Slowly, we started finding ways to laugh again. One night, as we sat in the living room with glasses of wine, Lily brought up the snake. "I still can't believe I did that," she said, her cheeks turning red with embarrassment. "It was reckless, to say the least." I chuckled, shaking my head. "It was also terrifying," I replied, though my tone was teasing. "But maybe it saved us in a weird way. If it hadn't happened, we might never have gotten to this point." She gave a small laugh, the sound light and genuine. "I guess that's one way to look at it," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth I hadn't seen in months. We both knew the memory of the snake would never truly disappear. It had become a strange and unforgettable part of our story. But in that moment, it felt less like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong and more like a reminder of how far we'd come. The new house wasn't just a change of location. It was a space that allowed us to build new habits and new memories. I started to see Lily relax in ways she hadn't before. She began talking more openly about her fears, not just about our relationship, but about the insecurities she'd carried with her for years. I listened, really listened, and she told me things she hadn't even admitted to herself before. I wasn't perfect either. I had moments of frustration, times when I felt like I was carrying more than my share of the emotional weight. But instead of bottling it up, I learned to voice my feelings in ways that didn't come across as blame. Lily, in turn, began to recognize when her fears were spiraling and learned how to bring them to me without letting them take over. The house became a home, not just in the physical sense, but as a reflection of the progress we were making. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of doubt and disagreement. But it was a place where we felt safe, where we could finally start looking forward instead of being weighed down by the past. The fresh start wasn't just about the walls that surrounded us. It was about the effort we were both putting in to rebuild something we thought we might have lost forever. Months later, the snake is still a bizarre memory, one that we sometimes joke about, but it no longer defines us. Instead, it's a reminder of how far we've come and how much effort we've put into rebuilding what was broken. The work hasn't been easy, and things aren't perfect. There are still moments of doubt and tension. But what's changed is how we handle them. Instead of letting those moments fester and grow into something toxic, we face them together, armed with the tools therapy has given us. When Lily feels insecure, she doesn't bottle it up until it explodes into accusations. Now, she tells me, sometimes it's as simple as, "I felt a little anxious when you didn't text back earlier," or, "I know this sounds silly, but can you reassure me?" Her honesty makes it easier for me to respond with the same openness. I've learned that those small moments of validation matter more than I ever realized. On my side, I've stopped retreating when things get hard. When I feel myself pulling away out of frustration or exhaustion, I remind myself to lean in instead. It's not always easy. Old habits die hard. But I've come to understand that love isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about showing up, even when things are messy or uncomfortable. Therapy has taught us that being honest doesn't mean being perfect. It means being willing to work through the imperfections, even when it's hard. Looking back, I still can't believe we made it through something so chaotic and came out stronger on the other side. The snake incident could have ended us. Honestly, it should have ended us if you'd told me about it in the moment. But instead of being the final straw, it became a turning point, a wake-up call that forced us to confront the cracks in our foundation and do the hard work of repairing them. We're not the same people we were when this all started, and our relationship isn't the same either. That version of us, the one that took trust and connection for granted, is gone. What we have now is something more deliberate, more honest, and more vulnerable. It's not perfect, and it never will be. But it's real. It's ours. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't gone to therapy, if we'd let the snake incident be the end of the story. I wonder where we'd be now, separate, maybe both nursing wounds that never fully healed. But then I look at Lily and see the changes she's made, the work she's put in, and I know the effort has been worth it. I see the way she smiles now, not guarded or forced but genuine, and it feels like we've found something new in each other. The road ahead isn't clear, but I think that's okay. Life is unpredictable, and so is love. What matters is that we're still here, still trying, still showing up for each other even when it's hard. The snake may have been a catalyst for everything that followed, but it's no longer the center of our story. Instead, it's a strange chapter in a book that's still being written, a reminder of where we've been and how far we've come.